Hello and welcome to today's European SharePoint Office 365 and Azure Community webinar. My name is Shane and I'm delighted to be joined by Erwin van Hoonen, MCM and MVP at Rencor Sweden, who will be talking to you about PnP PowerShell for both IT professionals and developers. Remember to join in the conversation about today's webinar on Twitter. Our Twitter handle is @EuropeanSP and our hashtag is ESPC19. Don't forget to check out the Resource Center. This is packed with the latest blogs, ebooks, webinars, and how-to videos. Simply visit SharePointEurope.com and click the content link. Also, join us at ESPC 19. Get a free 2-for-1 discount code for 2019 and save 50%. You get 2 4-day tickets for the price of 1. See SharePointEurope.com for further details. After the webinar, we will have a questions and answers session. Type any questions you have for Erwin in the question window. Some questions will be selected and answered at the end of the presentation. This webinar will be recorded and you will be added to the Resource Center where you will be notified by email when it is available. And now I'm going to pass you over to our webinar presenter, Erwin van Hoonen. Hello, Erwin.
Good afternoon, morning, evening, wherever you are located. Let me share my screen and we can get up and running.
Super, so, take it away.
Everything should be okay now.
Brilliant.
Right, so Erwin van Hoonen, I'm a product manager at Rencor. And I was lucky enough to be able to speak last year at ESPC in Copenhagen. Today, as Shane already mentioned, I will talk about PnP PowerShell for both IT professionals and developers. I have to admit, I have a bit of a problem with the terminology IT professional because it almost sounds to me that developers are not IT professionals. They're like a different breed. We have IT professionals being the admins, and then we have, we also have developers. But okay, this is the terminology that Microsoft uses, so let's stick with that. I want to start with a bit of a history of where PnP PowerShell comes from. So we've been around already for quite some years. PnP PowerShell was introduced in 2014 and came out of a project that I did at the time as a consultant. I was working as a consultant and I had a need to do things in SharePoint Online that I couldn't pull off with the tools available to me at the time. And I started to build up this library of PowerShell commandlets. And then I got in touch with the PnP project, which was at the time only run by people effectively from Microsoft, and showed it to them, and they were like, "Okay, we want this," and asked me if I would be interested in becoming part of that core team and working with them. And I've been around in PnP since then. The numbers of PnP PowerShell actually we would have never guessed. It would become this popular. It's actually pretty scary at times to see. So we have an average of 6 million commandlets that are being executed every day. And those 6 million commandlets make up 1.5 billion HTTP requests per month. That is a ridiculous amount. It's actually hard to grasp how much that is. Now you can question, how do we know that? Well, every request that the commandlets are making are basically going over HTTP. We include a header in that request, and in that header we have the version of the PnP PowerShell is used and the commandlet that is executed. Notice that we do not include the parameters or the values of the parameters. That is not being sent to the server. We have no clue what you're doing, where you're doing it, etc. We just know you executed this commandlet and that's it, and the data is anonymous. Then we have access to the logs of Office 365 through all kinds of complex constructs. So we cannot go to a server and just look into the log file if you're wondering. So do not stop me on a conference and say, can you check out this in the log? I can't. But through various pipelines and everything, we get data out of those logs and we can see how many commandlets are being executed and when. To give you an idea about the total storage, that's why it's a bit lighter gray here. So PnP Sites Core, the underlying library of the PnP PowerShell, is actually this number is already old, but it says here 10 billion requests per month. We're actually beyond 10 billion requests per month, which is a ridiculous number. I always, when I try to explain the difference between a million and a billion, is like if you say, if I ask you to wait 1 million seconds, I think it comes down to waiting like 5 days. I don't have the exact number of days in my head again, but it's like 5 days. And if I ask you to wait 1 billion seconds, you're basically waiting a bit more than 30 years. That is the difference in 1 million and a billion. We currently have over 380 commandlets, and that is growing on a monthly basis. It hasn't happened that we threw away commandlets. It's only been happening that we added commandlets to it. So it's growing nicely, and it's used more and more and more and more. So where do they come in? Where do they fit? So if you remember the old days, if you're a developer, if you're attending this webinar and you're a developer, you might remember the old days before SPFX, where you opened Visual Studio, you started to build your solution, you pressed F5, you provisioned the solution, and you had to wait. It was waiting, and you waited a bit longer, and then the server was restarted, and then you checked if everything worked, and it didn't maybe, and you have to go back fixing the errors, and you have to go back to line 2. It's a very slow and cumbersome process. Things have changed. In the new world, we open Visual Studio Code. At least most people that build SPFX solutions live in Visual Studio Code, and I can't blame them. It's a very good tool. You build the solution with Gulp. You debug your solution with Gulp Serve. You fix your errors because everything is local, so it's instant. And if you run the tool chain correctly, you can actually make changes to the code without needing to reload the page where your web part or whatever is hosted. It just automatically does that for you. And when you're done, you run the gulp build ship, the gulp package solution ship commandlets, and then you have an app package. And how do you get that app package now to the server? Well, one way of doing it is by means of navigating to your app catalog and opening that page and then uploading or dragging and dropping that solution package. And that's a way of doing it, and that works. But if you want to automate this whole process, how do you do it then? If you want to do the build, the packaging, and the deployment automatically, what are your options then? And then the option is basically PnP PowerShell or the Office 365 CLI. They have different platforms behind the scenes. They both can do the same effectively. So this webinar is focusing on PnP PowerShell only. I will not go into the Office 365 CLI. So how to get started with PnP PowerShell? If you're completely new to PnP PowerShell, you first have to decide which version you need. We have 3 versions, and soon we will have 4 versions. And there's a reason behind that. PnP PowerShell and PnP Sites Core make use of the CSOM library, the client-side object model for SharePoint. And the client-side object model for SharePoint comes in different flavors for the different versions of SharePoint you're targeting. And that's why we have different binary builds of PnP Sites Core and PnP PowerShell that refer to those client-side object model libraries. Now, if you work both to, like, say, SharePoint 2013 and SharePoint Online, and you do not want to have both versions of PnP PowerShell installed, the safest bet you can take is to install the lowest version, e.g. SharePoint PnP PowerShell 2013. That one will work to SharePoint Online. Same goes with SharePoint, the PnP PowerShell for SharePoint 2016. That one will also work towards SharePoint Online. The only thing is that you will not get the latest and the greatest that SharePoint Online offers that we already also implemented in PnP PowerShell. You can use the online version also to on-prem, but you might run into issues and errors. So the safest bet is if you work with two servers and you only want one version of PnP PowerShell installed, go for the lowest version. You see there in light gray, there is PnP PowerShell 2019. We're working on that. It will come. We're not there yet, but we're working on it. It's quite a lot of changes we have to do to the underlying libraries. It will come, hopefully sooner than later. A thing to point out is that if you write PowerShell scripts, the last thing you should do is to put your username and password in that script. Never, ever, ever, ever do that. And I've seen it because it's so much easier, but you run into all kinds of challenges and risks, obviously, because typically the accounts that people use to run the PowerShell scripts are have a lot of rights. They're a little high level up. They can be farm admins. So do not put your password and your username in a script. Your username is okay to a certain extent, but the password, absolutely not. We have a solution for that, and that is the stored credential. So Windows has a credential manager. If you go to the control panel, you will find a credential manager. You can add credentials there, username, password combinations. And they are typically used for like websites. I don't know how many people do that, but it is like a central encrypted storage in Windows where you can store usernames and passwords. PnP PowerShell can make use of those. And the easiest way to do that is actually by using the add PnP stored credential commandlet. It will ask you for a username and a password and a URL. And that's what you enter those values, and then you can refer to them. And I will actually demo that a bit later and how that works, because I used the credential manager myself for basically every connection I make to the to my tenant. Let's go to the next slide. So let me show you how to install. I have a pristine environment here, and this is, as I always say, the only blue screen in Windows that I'm happy to see, being the PowerShell window. So in order to install PnP PowerShell, if you're running on a relatively up-to-date operating system, Windows 10 or Windows 8, where you have the latest management updates running, you can use the install module commandlet. So that's the easiest one. So install module, name, if it wakes up there, and you enter the name of the module you want to install. And in this case, I'm installing the PnP PowerShell for SharePoint Online. And you press enter. And basically what it does now, it connects to the PowerShell gallery, which is a Microsoft hosted website where people, developers like me, can upload PowerShell modules. And it says, like, by default, this PowerShell gallery is not a trusted repository. You can make it a trusted repository, it is up to you. But for testing reasons, I do not do that on purpose. So every time I use this, I have to say, yeah, okay, I'm good. I know what I'm installing here. Go ahead, install it. And what it will do now, it will install the package, which is a relatively small package, 7.46 megabyte. You see, it doesn't go too fast on my machine, and that has to do with the fact that I'm on a 4G connection. And it should be done. It's installing it now. Takes a tiny bit, and it will update the installation in PowerShell. It will add it to the path, etc., etc. Let's wait a bit more. I can nervously press enter, see if it happens. There we go. It installed it now. So now I'm up and running. And if I, my next step would be now to just simply test if it works. So I can say ConnectPNP Online. And if I press tab, it loads it. If I press dash, you see, actually took a bit. I pressed tab, and then it took a while before the URL parameter actually changed the U in an uppercase. That's when PowerShell dynamically loads this module. So now it's available, and I can say Erwin MCM, and this is my tenant, slides demo 1, and press enter, and it connects to my tenant, and it connects to that specific site collection. So that's also important to keep in mind. PnP PowerShell always connects to a single site collection. You do not connect to the tenant, you connect to a site collection. And there you see, the prompt changed if you're interested in how I did that, because this is not built into PnP PowerShell, but this allows me to see, for instance, how where I've just been connected to, which site I'm currently connected to. There is actually a blog post on my blog where you can see how I did this. It's a very small change to your PowerShell environment, and you will get this information. Basically, how it works, what we do is the moment we connect to a site, we set an environment variable with the name and the URL of the site, and this prompt just outputs the value of that environment variable. That's what it's doing. So now PnP PowerShell is installed. There was all there is to it effectively to install PnP PowerShell. I will not go into all 380 commandlets here. That is just way too far, goes way too far, and we'll be talking for a couple of weeks from now. But let's dive into a bit more nice things to know about PnP PowerShell. So let's go back to the slides. So as I said already, the ConnectPNP Online is your entry point. It's the glue that binds the commandlets together. If you are a developer, what we're doing effectively with the ConnectPNP Online, and if you're a developer with CSAM, if you know what CSAM is, we're building up a client context. And that client context is then as a static variable stored in the current PnP PowerShell session or in the PowerShell session. So all the other commandlets can fall back on that context and then connect to the site and do their things. If you use multi-factor authentication, which is more and more common, and I think more people should use it, you will have to use this use web login option. If you connect to PnP Online with the URL, it will use the default authentication towards SharePoint Online, and that will fail because there's this prompt coming up where you specify how you want to, like for instance, by SMS or with an app, confirm your authentication request. If you use the use web login, you will be able to do that selection, and because we launch a little web browser in a window where you can make those choices. The downside of this system is if you use web login, it will be very complex for you to script things. So if you want to build scripts that run things automated, you have a problem there. You will have to work your way around it by using an account, for instance, that doesn't use web login, or create an app ID and an app secret and use those to connect. The ConnectPNP Online commandlet is the by far most complex commandlet we have in the range because it has so many options and so many parameters. And I urge you to check out the help for this commandlet. So if I move over back PowerShell here, and we have a look at, say, help connect PnP online, and I go for detailed. You see there's a lot of parameters that you can send in, a lot of options. It allows you to connect to the graph. It has the, it actually can reuse the SharePoint Online Management Shell authentication if you want to do that. We have our own PnP Office 365 Management Shell, which is an Azure multi-tenant app that basically requesting access to your tenant. And once granted, you will use the credentials, or you will use those credentials to connect. You can select with an app ID, app secret, etc. So there's a lot of ways of connecting to your site. You see all the parameters here, and they describe what we do with them and how we work and what rights we need. And every commandlet has also these examples. So make sure that you look into the help for every commandlet if you want to figure out how to use it. Every commandlet has one or more examples describing how to use the commandlet itself. And sometimes we show you a combination of commandlets to use, like do first this, then that, etc. But it depends a bit on the commandlet itself. When it comes to this credential manager thing that I mentioned earlier, you might have noticed that when I did my connect, so if I go back to the connect here, I did not provide any credentials. I did not tell my username. I did not put my password in there. It just connected. What it does is that the credential manager contains an entry, in my case, with this URL, if I highlight this one. And what PnP PowerShell does then is it goes to your Windows Credential Manager, finds entries that start with this URL here, and if there's a match, it will use the credential for that that was specified for that entry in the credential manager, and it will use that username and password. That way, it makes it very easy for you to script. If you are running multiple scripts, it's very easy also that you only update the credential manager entry instead of going to every script and updating every script again. So this way, I store my username and my password in the credential manager, and I don't have to specify that anymore myself. You can be granular there. You can even say like, okay, so this is I have an entry in my credential manager for this specific URL, the one that's highlighted, that applies to every site in my tenant, but I also can create a specific one for this URL that will only apply to that tenant. So you can play a bit around with that. On the GitHub repo and on docs.microsoft.com, we actually have a description on how to use the credential manager and how to use that with PnP PowerShell. Away with PowerShell, and next to the next slide here. A little gem that I want to point out. Not many people are aware of this one, and it's sort of hidden away and not very much promoted, but I do believe it's actually really nice. Use the create drive option. And I'm going to show you what that does. So if I go back to my site here, and I say ConnectPNP Online demo 1, create drive, just dash create drive, press enter. It reconnects to the site, but it does something else behind the scenes. Take a bit. There we go. So it's connected now to the site. Nothing changed. I have a normal session. I can do get PnP list, for instance, to show me all the lists in this specific site. But what I also can do is change to a different drive. I can say cd spo /. And now if I do here, I'm actually in my SharePoint site. So I have a drive to my SharePoint site. So for instance, if we go to site pages, there are my files, my pages, my ASPX files, and I can copy things out of here. I can copy things in here. So this is a very nice way of actually accessing stuff in your site, creating folders, removing folders, etc., etc. It's a little gem. You keep in mind that you can only use this within PowerShell. You cannot go to like Windows File Explorer and do things there. Unfortunately not. You will have to do it with PowerShell. You have to do it with PowerShell commandlets. But this is a really nice way of actually diving around into, okay, what is in my site? What is located where? Is this file really of the right size? That kind of stuff, without actually physically having to open a browser and navigate to that site. And this is the technology we're using for this is actually built into PowerShell. Not necessarily to connect to a SharePoint site, but it's a construct that allows developers to build these kind of drives, and PowerShell itself has it also. You might be aware of that. If you do cd hkey-lm, I'm actually navigating into my registry, hkey local machine. So it's the same technology that we're using. But in this case, there's this drive. You can rename the drive to something else if you want to with another parameter, if you don't like the SPO prefix. This only works to SharePoint Online, though. Just saying. Go back to the C drive. So. And I just did that. Azure Functions. Azure Functions are very, very powerful. The challenge with Azure Functions is, and basically I would say everything in Azure, is that it changes so fast. It goes really fast, and the UI changes all the time. You might have seen that in the portal. Everything changes. Everything looks different. Every so many weeks, and also some functionality gets deprecated. So in the case of Azure Functions, where if you want to use a PnP PowerShell commandlets in Azure Functions, you will have to create a function app in a V1 shape and not in a V2 shape. The V2 version, which is the current version of Azure Functions, do not allow PowerShell. And you will have to fall back to V1 for those. And I want to show that to you how that works. It's actually very simple, but the moment you've seen it, it's pretty trivial, but you still have to know it. So if we go to the browser here, and here I have a function app. And this is a blank function app called ESPC demo, and there's no functions in there. And if I create a new function, and it's loading that page now. It's probably my network connection acting up here again. You have to understand, I live in the middle of Sweden, in the middle of a forest, and we're unlucky enough not to have any fiber connection here yet. So I live on a 4G connection. And here we go. And so this allows me to create a new Azure function. And here these are the options, basically, Visual Studio or VS Code. But I want to create a PowerShell thing. How do I do that? Well, you have to change it from V2 to V1. So if you look here in the top, there's a Platform Features tab. If I go there, there's a Function App Settings where I can click on. And here you see Runtime version 2. And I switch it now back to version 1. And notice that this is all described in an article that I have a link to later also. So we're flipping the runtime from version 2 to version 1. And that also means that the way we can create functions changes. It falls back to the old way of doing it. There we go. We're now at version 1. So if I now create a function, it says there, for PowerShell, Python, and Batch, create your own custom function. So if I click here, and then we can create a trigger, HTTP trigger, a queue trigger, a time trigger, etc. But the thing is, you don't see PowerShell here. Now, let me give you an example in where these functions are, for instance, very nice. You could create a Microsoft flow that you hook up, and that flow to SharePoint, and that flow triggers a function. That function can then run PnP PowerShell. We actually have an example on docs.microsoft.com on how to do that, where you create a site design, and that site design runs a site script. That site script is run the moment you create a new site collection, and that site script launches or adds an entry to an Azure storage queue, and then there is a queue trigger, an Azure function that has a queue trigger that kicks in the moment an entry is created in that queue, picks up the item from the queue, finds the URL of the site that has just been created, and uses PnP PowerShell to apply a PnP provisioning template to it. It's a complex story, but we wrote it down step by step on what to do on docs.microsoft.com or how to get it up and running. And the moment you've done it once, you will probably see the possibilities by extending your own site designs with Azure Functions. But nevertheless, there's no PowerShell listed here. It's just C#, F#, and JavaScript. I have to turn on experimental language support. And now PowerShell shows up here. So if I click PowerShell, I can create a new function. That will take a bit too. And it will create me an empty PowerShell or almost empty PowerShell editor. And in this case, there we go. Now this is standard PowerShell. It does not know about PnP PowerShell. So how do I tell this PowerShell script that there is something alike PnP PowerShell? Well, for that, you will have to upload PnP PowerShell to your function. And the first step to take there is that you actually save a copy of PnP PowerShell to your machine. So if I go to the saved folder, this is what I did here. And you see the SharePoint PnP PowerShell. And this is basically the files that come from the PowerShell gallery. How to do this? You say save module name SharePoint PnP PowerShell Online path, and then see wherever you want to save it. And you press enter. I did it already, so the files have been saved to my file system. So if I look into this folder, you see there's a 3.5. This is the latest release. We released this one last Monday. You see here all the files that make up PnP PowerShell, all the files there. So in order to get this now into your Azure function is what you do is you go to your function app functionality. We can close this. You go to platform features and you launch the advanced tools, Kudu. And it goes to a new browser tab. And you get a very old-fashioned user interface. You get this. And then you can navigate to your debug console, and then it's up to you to decide if you want to use the command line or PowerShell. We're using PowerShell in my case. And it will launch a sort of a file explorer PowerShell combination here. So I can enter PowerShell commands there in the bottom, and it will show me a navigational structure in the top there. And you see there's a side folder. And in the side folder, if it's done loading, there will be a www root folder. And there, this is my function I just created. So I can navigate to this folder. There you see my actual function here, the PowerShell script that I'm typing into the editor. Here I can create a new folder. I call that folder modules. And in that folder, I can drag and drop this folder or this folder. That's up to you. It doesn't really matter that much. But you just upload that folder. You just drag and drop the whole folder in this interface here. You upload it. I will not do it. It will take a while to upload. But from that moment on, PnP PowerShell is available. So the downside of this approach is just that you will have to do that for every function within the, well, once for the, yeah, you have to do this for every function in this function app. So you're duplicating a lot of things and you end up in maintaining your modules, because we release a new version of PnP PowerShell every month, and I strongly urge you to update it. Having said that, if you are at the latest version, and we will release a new version in the future, we will actually notify you. There will be a little warning the moment you do a ConnectPNP Online. That will only show once per session, by the way, and it's a non-breaking warning. But this is the way forward. Again, I said there's a lot of clicking me around and opening things, and I totally get it if you are like not writing down everything now, because we wrote this down in an article, and I will actually point that article out to you a bit later where to find that. So back to the slides here. Where's PowerPoint? There we go. This is the URL to that article, and I will actually navigate there at the end of the deck when I'm done with the presentation and everything. I will actually navigate to docs.microsoft.com and show you where to go on how to find it. The article describes how to actually hook up a site design and a site script to an Azure queue that is then being processed by an Azure function that has a queue trigger that then applies a PowerShell commandlet, PowerShell script. That PowerShell script uses PnP PowerShell that applies a PnP provisioning template back to the site you just created. That all happens in seconds, if not less. It's actually very fun. I think it's very fun to see how that all hooks up together and works together. There's another thing that I would like to point out, and that's sort of a newcomer in the relative newcomer in the Azure environment, and that is Azure Automation Runbooks. And the cool thing about Azure Automation Runbooks is that they have support for the PowerShell gallery. So you do not have to upload your references to PnP PowerShell manually, but it's just built into the user interface. And let me show you that in the browser again, because I have this tab open. Here, if we go here. Here, I filtered down my resources, and you see the first entry there is PnP PowerShell, which is an automation account. That's where you start with. You start with an automation account. So if I open this automation account, you see that if I scroll a bit down here, there's an entry, modules gallery. And if I click on that modules gallery, it will load effectively the PowerShell gallery from the PowerShellGallery.com. And here I can search for PnP. And here you see SharePoint PnP PowerShell Online 2013, 2016. If I click on this one, I can say import, and it will install it into this automation account. So it's available. You see all the command lists that we have available. They're all listed here. And it will install it into your automation account. Now, if you then create a runbook in your automation account, so if we go back here, sorry, there, and I go to my runbooks, and you go, for instance, to the test one here, and I click Edit, you see that there's a graphical representation of your PowerShell. It's almost like a flow chart. And every block is a commandlet. So if I click on ConnectPNP Online, you see that there's actually a configure parameters, and it has all these parameters that I can fill in, and it will help you also on how to do things. So I can pick a parameter set if I want to. If I scroll a bit down here, see there's the URL that I entered to my site, and here's credentials. And the credentials are not stored in the script. They are dynamically retrieved from the runbook. So if I go back to my runbook here, you see there's an asset, there's credentials, and I can add credentials here, username, password combination. So it becomes a central manageable item. Instead of actually putting it into hard-coded into my script, I can just easily change it here and my script is automatically updated. You can define what happens with output and input parameters here. So it's all in a graphical way of doing it. If you prefer to do it in a more traditional way, you can also create a non-graphical runbook. So if I go here, and if I click Edit here, this is just the old school way of doing it with PowerShell. You just write your script, and there is this built-in command that get automation PS credential. And it actually reads that again from the assets that I have here. There's a credential, and it reads this credential and the username and the password, and it uses that one to connect. So I say ConnectPNP Online, and then the credentials are in this variable. And then I get a context and a web and whatever I want to do. So runbooks are actually really nice. They have full support for PowerShell. They have full support for the PowerShell gallery. So I strongly urge you to check out Azure Automation. And you can hook up webhooks to it, so you can be triggered from the outside. So a lot of functionality with Azure Automation, sort of replacing Azure Functions, if you want to say so. And let's go back to the deck. So where are we going? What is the future of PnP PowerShell? Does PowerShell have a future? I strongly believe it does. But we see that PowerShell itself, while still being maintained, is actually already superseded by a new version of PowerShell, being PowerShell 6. And PowerShell 6 is not built into any of the Windows versions. It's a separate download. And the cool thing about PowerShell 6 is that it is multi-platform. It runs on Linux, Macs, and on Windows. And how does it do that? It uses something called .NET Core and .NET Standard. Now the problem with .NET Core and .NET Standard is, the challenge that we have in the SharePoint world is that PnP sites Core and PnP PowerShell behind the scenes make use of the CSOM library, and the CSOM library does not work on .NET Core and .NET Standard. You have to run it on the normal .NET framework. And there we have a challenge. Now, we've been seeing this going forward to .NET Core already for quite some time. And we asked Microsoft, because keep in mind that PnP, although we work very closely with Microsoft, we are not Microsoft. We asked them several times now, like, guys, come on, what's the story? Will there be a .NET Core version or not? And they were like, yeah, it's difficult, complex, changing, building, complex. And then one of the PnP guys, being Bert Janssen, was bored or he got angry, I don't know, or maybe a combination of the two, but he sat down in a weekend and ported CSOM to .NET Core in a weekend, effectively. And that build we started to work on and test. And the build he did worked, and it worked on Linux and it worked on Mac, and that opened all kinds of interesting scenarios. For instance, the ability to run PnP PowerShell on a Mac or on a Linux machine. It also opened the possibility to use the PnP Sites core and CSON library on an iPhone. You could build an iPhone app that connects back to SharePoint using Xamarin. So there's many ways forward. So this was actually really interesting. So we demoed that last year to Microsoft, and they were like, okay, how did you do that? And we explained that to them. They now agreed upon releasing CSON for .NET Standard. So keep in mind that .NET Standard is not a version of the framework. It's effectively a file format. And .NET Core and .NET Framework, the later builds of .NET Framework, can both read code written in .NET Standard and execute that. So the future will be that we will change PnP PowerShell and PnP Sites Core to .NET Standard, and then it will run on Macs, on Windows, and everywhere basically. That will happen. I was hoping that it would have happened last year already, but even though Microsoft is a very big company, they also have resource challenges, and it will happen hopefully this year, but we're not there yet. Another thing what we're talking with Microsoft is to merge the SharePoint Online Management Shell and PnP PowerShell into one library. Because right now you install two libraries, and that's maybe confusing. Or two libraries to maintain is basically one library to many. So if there's an overlap, they complete each other, and it would be nice if we could actually just deliver one module or one library with the commandlets instead of multiple. That will come. We're talking with Microsoft about that. It's an ongoing talk. It has some implications because it would either mean that PnP PowerShell would go closed source, and that will never happen. I can promise you that. It will always stay open source. But that basically means that the SPO management shell would have to go open source, because we're not changing. We will, by definition, will always be open source and free. I had that question on another conference a while ago. It's like, you guys are so popular now, when are you going to lock it down? We're not. It's no. He was very afraid, the person asking the question, if we start to ask money for it. We will not. This is open source. It will always be open source. No worries there. Now I want to give you a little little sneak peek of what it looks like. And if everything went okay on my end, I should have something here to demo to you. There we go. So what you see here is macOS. And here I have a PowerShell running on macOS. And in PowerShell, I can say ConnectPNP Online to the same site I just used earlier. And there is this demo 1 site that I'm connecting to. And notice that I do not enter my credentials. We use the same construct on the Mac as we do on Windows by using a credential manager. It's called the keychain on the Mac, but the idea is identical. And now I'm connected to the site, and I can do get PnP list. And I have all the functionality, and there's full 100% compatibility between the PowerShell on Windows and PowerShell on the Mac. So if you have a PowerShell script on Windows that you want to run on your Mac, you can, no problem at all. And I think, and let me double check that. I'm not 100% sure if we did it already, but if I do create drive, see what happens. This is an early build. So see SPO, and there we go. Even the create drive works, and I'm in my site. So we have basically full compatibility between running PowerShell on Windows, on a Mac, or on Linux. And this is where we're going. It's not there yet. We basically have just a build that you're looking at here right now, but it's a nice, bright future, I would say, with lots of interesting functionality upcoming. Okay, now let's go back to and not necessarily the, let's go back to the slide. Okay, so there is basically one URL to remember, and that is this one, aka MS SP PnP. If you enter this URL, you will end up at the launch page that is referring to everything related to PnP, not only PnP PowerShell, but PnP Sites Core, PnP JS, Office 365 CLI, our own build platform, etc., etc. It's all there. It's also, what you'll also find there is links to articles. You'll find there links to our monthly and bi-weekly meetings that we have. They are Skype for Business meetings. Just click on the link, add it to your calendar, and join, and just sit back and relax and listen to people from the community, people like you and me, demoing the great things they did. It is your ability to talk directly to SharePoint engineering because they show up on a weekly basis. And you can ask questions on like, okay, why did you guys do this in Flow, or why did you not do that in Flow, or when will be the next version of CSM coming out, or why is this missing in the REST API? Typical question, why is the taxonomy so missing in the REST API, etc. So this URL is the one to remember. What I would like to point out is when it comes to the help for SharePoint, PnP PowerShell Online. So if you go to docs.microsoft.com/SharePoint, easy to remember, docs.microsoft.com/SharePoint. You see the changes you can make, the decisions you can make here. It's like, as Vesa always pointed out, you're either a SharePoint developer or you're a SharePoint server, which is a pretty strange decision to make, but okay. But here in the middle, you see the PowerShell reference for SharePoint. And if you click on the PowerShell reference, you see the server commandlets, the SharePoint Online commandlets, and the patterns and practices, the PnP PowerShell commandlets. So if I click here, you see the PnP PowerShell commandlets. If I open the reference, you see all the PnP PowerShell commandlets there. And this is the same help you're looking at. We automatically generate this. It's the same help that is listed in the PowerShell commandlets itself. You see an overview of how to install the modules, how to get started, etc., etc. It's all there. So if we go to import PnP term set, you see there's the help on how to commandlet, what kind of parameters it supports, a description and what it does, and the examples. So docs.microsoft.com/SharePoint, and then make the choice to go to the PowerShell reference. You'll find everything. And obviously, not only PnP PowerShell, but also the SPO management shell is here with all the commandlets there. And we have even the on-prem commandlets all listed. The documentation completeness of the online and server ones are a bit different from PnP PowerShell because they're not they're manually created. We generate them, the help files. That gives us a benefit that we're sort of complete. If there's a commandlet, there is help. If you're interested in helping out with documentation on our GitHub repo, which you will find links to from AKMS, SPPNP. On our GitHub repo, we have an entry that describes on how to make documentation changes. We, as I said earlier, we generate the documentation, so the documentation is located in the code. You don't have to be a developer to understand how it works, but you will have to make changes to the code of a commandlet in order to make changes to the documentation. It's relatively self-explanatory if you look in the code, but read that section about making documentation changes. So that is it for me. I wonder if you have any questions.
Great stuff, Erwin. Thank you for a super presentation. That was really, really good. Yeah, there's a good few questions in here, so I'll get cracking on them. First question, Erwin, is if I feel there is something missing from PnP PowerShell, how do I make that known?
Okay, all right. Okay, so the best way to do it is to go to our GitHub repository. So if you go to github.com/SharePoint PnP PowerShell, this is the repo where PnP PowerShell code resides. Here is an issues list. And you see there's quite a number there, 285. But the only way to actually come in touch with us is by creating an issue here. Please do not try to mail me. Well, you can mail me, of course, but we don't scale. That is the problem. We simply don't scale. We all have a day job, and mailing us will not get you up in the queue, unfortunately. So the best way to do it is to create an issue. So you go to the issues list and you say new issue, and you fill in the things. And we have a couple of remarks here, like, okay, if you're using this or that, consider going there. If you're doing this, then confirm what you expect, what the actual behavior is. Fill this in as complete as possible and click submit. The reason we also would like you to create an issue instead of trying to contact us directly is that we're not the only ones building this. There's more people working on this than just us. Every PnP project is basically a community project. There are people from the community helping us to make this better. And they know a lot about it too. So other people would be able to answer questions, or even if you say like, oh, I missed this commandlet, I would like this functionality. Someone might jump in and say, oh, that's cool. I'm going to create a pull request and create that commandlet for you and create a pull request. And we will happily merge that if it fits within the whole set of commandlets. So that is the way to go forward. Go to our GitHub repository and create an issue. It's not scary, just do it.
Okay, great. Next question, is PnP PowerShell supported by Microsoft?
That's a good one. Yeah, no. The answer is a hard no there. Absolutely not supported. And that's sometimes frustrating, because I've heard stories where people say they create a support request at Microsoft, and then they say like, I'm running this script, and then that support person sees that script and says like, oops, sorry, not supported. That's frustrating. I understand that. You're on your own. The only support you're getting basically from Microsoft is null. Create an issue. Use the community, and they will help you as much as possible. Yeah.
Okay, super. Next question. Using the install module commandlet to install SharePoint PnP PowerShell Online, is that the same method to update it?
Yes. It's actually, well, no, you don't use install. You actually use, if I go here, you use update module. That's how you update the module. Update module, and then name SharePoint PnP PowerShell Online. It will update the module in place. It actually will install it besides it. So you can always revert to an older version if needed. But update module will basically get the latest version and install it. And you will see that if I do get module here, it will show you all the modules installed, and you see there's SharePoint PnP PowerShell Online. If you want to figure out where this one is actually been installed, you just say select name path, and then you see here it's like located in SharePoint program files, Windows PowerShell modules, SharePoint PnP Online. You'll find a folder in here with the version number. And if you have an older version and you update, it will be just created a new folder with the new version number, but the old ones will still be installed. So you could actually revert if you want to. But that's how you update module.
Okay, and that flows in perfectly to the next question. Is there a way to set the version of the function after creation?
Okay, in the Azure function. If you have an Azure function in your function app and it is a version 2 app, you will not be able to revert to version 1 app because that function is created already. You will have to remove that function. Okay. And if it's a PowerShell function, you cannot upgrade to version 2 because version 2 of the function apps do not support PowerShell.
Okay. Erwin,
so how do you?
Okay. How do you use credentials with Azure Functions?
You can create in an Azure function it works a bit different. Let me see if I can easily navigate there. It's also described in that article actually that I mentioned. If you go to the function here, now I have to look if I can find it. It's been a while that I did this. application settings. What's happening? There we go. You can create entries here. And these ones you can use the application settings, and they're like hidden values. Some of them you can edit. Some you can actually, if I create a new setting, I think somewhere, or is it a connection string I can use, that are like unreadable. So basically, you cannot show the value, but you can only read it effectively. And those you can use in your Azure function too. And we described that in the article too. So it's basically a PowerShell commandlet that you use to read out those values from your application settings. So that's effectively how you use credentials in an Azure function.
Okay, brilliant. Here's a great one. At ESPC 18, you mentioned that it was possible with PnP to save any SharePoint site as a template and provision multiple sites based on that template. Can you tell me when this will be available?
It is available.
Oh, great stuff.
Yeah.
Brilliant.
Very briefly, connect to your site like I did right now. Get PnP provisioning template. myfile.xml, press enter. It will connect to the site. It will retrieve the site as a template, connect to another site that you want to have that site to, and say apply PnP provisioning template, and then provide that file here, my file, the one you just saved, and it will play back all the changes to the other site.
Okay, brilliant. Will PnP have the capability in future to manage more than just SharePoint Online, e.g. Microsoft Groups or Teams?
Yes. Yes, we are looking into that, or actually we no, it's not even looking into it. We will, maybe not necessarily from PnP PowerShell perspective, but from the PnP provisioning hierarchy, or the tenant templates, as we call them nowadays, where we will allow you to create teams and groups, etc. That will come. Yes, we're also looking into Flow.
Okay,
Microsoft
brilliant.
Flow. Yep.
And final question, can you recommend a first step resource for, pardon me now, CSOM or CSOM? I don't know if I'm pronouncing that. CSOM?
CSOM. Yeah, CSOM works too if you want. That doesn't matter.
Okay, I'm not an expert.
A first step resource for CSOM. Well, I'm the first to admit, or well, I didn't write it, so I can admit that the documentation for CSOM is pretty bad. There are books. He's not paying me, but I am still promoting my friend Paolo Pialorsi. He wrote a couple of good books actually. So look up Paolo Pialorsi on Amazon. He wrote a couple of good books for like Office 365 development, and he goes into, for instance, CSOM. He goes into REST, JavaScript, PnP PowerShell. Even it's in that book. So check that out. It's actually a really good book. Actually, I have it lying here, and it is called. Get it. It's called Programming Microsoft Office 365. It covers the Graph, Office 365 applications, SharePoint add-ins, Office 365 groups, and more. And it's written by, let me put his name on the screen. Old school notepad. Paolo Pialorsi. Programming Microsoft Office 365.
Brilliant, brilliant. Erwin, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you running through your ESPC 18 session with us. Really appreciate it. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.
Okay, brilliant. Erwin, thank you once again. And I'm just going to put you on silent there while I just wrap up everything here. So let me just change presenter here. We'll come back here. Okay, everybody. Please see sharepointeurope.com/register- for webinars for further details on all upcoming webinars, or visit our resource center where you will be able to gain access to blogs, ebooks, webinars, etc. Thank you once again to Erwin van Hoonen, who was our webinar presenter today. Take care and goodbye.